Today we look at a question: why did we leave our denomination of origin? And second, this podcast is going to be without a couple hosts for a few months, and we need your help. That's what's today on the To Be the Church podcast. Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. I'm Tyler. That's Andrew. Ben is on sabbatical.
Yeah,
we told you last week.
Later, Ben. It's the last week we're going to mention you. Just kidding.
All right.
So, Tyler, you're going on sabbatical in a few weeks, right?
I am, yeah.
So there is going to be a period of time, and you and I might do some pre-recording, beforehand, but there's going to be a period of time that's probably at least 6 weeks, maybe even 8 weeks long, where both you and Ben will both be on sabbatical. And so I've been thinking about, what do we do on the To Be the Church podcast without you and without Ben?
I think AI is your best option.
Okay.
We've dabbled in that a little bit. You could just make Ben and I say what we want to say.
Yeah, I like that. Cody. Yeah. Cody's going to make notes over here. So Cody will have that down. All right. AI, that's one option. That doesn't
seem time consuming at all.
Yeah. See, a really good use of our time. Yeah. So we've got these 14 college interns coming in over the summer. I've been thinking about how do I bring them in on a podcast? Is that dangerous? Is that, musings with college interns, questions from an intern, We did something like that years ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
Questions from
I remember one time Max was still kind of an intern and I was out of town and I opened the To Be the Church app and it was like on race in America with Max Janish. And I was like, oh, that's funny. And then you're like, hey, Max, how's it going? What do you think about this racial thing in America? And I was just like, no!
Dude, I did not remember that, but that's the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I got to dig that one up.
Maybe we could bring Max back on to talk about race in America.
We could.
He's a little more educated now.
Exactly.
On everything. But
yeah. He's a lot older, a lot more life lived.
Yeah.
Max is around. Max will be, he's basically the lead-ish pastor over at Camas Washougal the next 3 months as Ben's on sabbatical. Max is preaching about 4, I think, of the 12 weeks Ben will be out, and then several other of our teaching team are in over there too. But so dude, we need suggestions from our listeners. So listeners, send in questions, comments, thoughts. Not just, question for the podcast. Tell us what we should do during those 8 weeks. What do you want from us, right? What would you like to hear? You got no Tyler, no Ben. What do you want?
Also, this could be a train wreck, but if you think that you should join the podcast for a week, send that in via email too.
Love it. Yeah.
podcast@tobeTheChurch.com. Send that in. You'd be like, hey, I want to be on the episode and here's what I want to talk about.
I like it. Yeah. We'll just give you the mic, man. Yeah. Step on up to the microphone.
Do you remember really early on, we've been doing this for like 7 or 8 years now. And early on we had March Madness challenges on To Be the Church.
Okay. And
we only did it once because it went horribly wrong. But
I blocked it out too.
Yeah, we
along with Max on race.
we did a March Madness challenge, and the winner got to come on the podcast. And the kid who won, I remember who it was, but he was like 14 at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was like we brought him on, like, dude, you won the March Madness challenge. Yep.
I don't even remember who that was, but I do remember that.
What was your strategy? I don't know. It's just after like 5 minutes, okay. And it just took over.
Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
Dude. So if you've got people, or even if you got suggestions, we've had a lot of different of our pastors and different guests and people on the podcast. If you got some ideas for what this is, we could probably spend a whole episode in the next couple of weeks while you're still here, Tyler, just going through and vetting those ideas on air. So please send those in the various ways. Yeah.
So speaking of Ben's sabbatical, or just of Ben, we did this thing here at East Vancouver called Step 1, where it's kind of an introduction to the church. And we talk about ways you can connect with the church. We actually mention this podcast and say, hey, every Friday for the last many years we've been doing this. And some pictures come up of the people who are on the podcast and stuff like that. And afterwards, I had a guy come up to me and he was like, hey, I've been in the church for 3 months. And I've been wondering since, I found the podcast before I even showed up on a Sunday. And he's like, and I've been wondering since I got here, who the heck is this Ben guy and where is he at? Why am I not ever seeing him at NGC? And then he was like, and I also, he didn't realize that it was connected. He did not know what a CW was.
Okay.
And he's like, I Googled CW, like CW theology, CW Christianity, trying to figure it out. And he just had like and then he's like, so it all clicks now that Ben is the pastor of the other NGC, Camas Washougal. Yeah. And so I'm like, man, maybe we need to be a little bit more clear about who we are and what we do. But,
yeah. I think that, that's total classic insider language, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the insider language, your acronyms you use, or the just things you say. And for outsiders or new people or whoever, it can be like, wait, what are you talking about? So dude, maybe we accidentally had a little bit of our own Northwest Gospel-ese right there, right? So Christianese style. Yeah, it's good.
So I found this old question that's been in our system since January.
We've probably been avoiding it, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't know why we haven't talked about it. This is just interesting. It says, as leaders of a church that recently left its denomination of origin, would you tell your stories of coming to the divide and having to wrestle with it both personally and as leaders? How have you experienced disunity in the Big C church, and how did you handle it?
Well,
the divide, disagreements on open-handed issues that cause people to divide and cloister into tribes that do not want to or tend to not associate it with outsiders, thereby creating their own culture and traditions on these open-handed issues, and they're not central to the gospel, which are important issues of conscience.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't think we've ever really walked through that on the podcast. So what the listener or the question asker is mentioning there, and it actually technically wasn't our denomination of origin. So in speaking specifically of East Vancouver here, because that actually occurred with both our churches, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Different
East Vancouver
angles,
and Camas Washougal. So basically at East Vancouver here, the church started in 1938 as an independent church, kind of Pentecostal leaning for sure. And then about 1930, it was 1944, 1945, toward the end of World War II, that the church, about 6 to 7 years into its existence, joined the Assemblies of God. And we were in the Assemblies of God for 70 years or so. I don't the exact number there, but I could calculate it knowing exactly when we left. But so I got here in late 2010, so almost 13 years ago now, and we were AG at the time, right? Still an Assemblies of God church, and had been for decades. I at the time was ordained in the Assemblies of God. That's where I grew up in that denomination, pretty much, not fully, but my wife and I pretty much most of our time as kids, teenagers, were in AG churches. And then I went to an AG college, and that's when I got ordained in the AG. And so that was our background. Tyler, you grew up AG for sure too. Never got ordained, but you were,
Yeah, my grandparents, like the church that they landed in, my grandpa was kind of not, I don't think he was necessarily saved through the church softball ministry at the Assemblies of God church, but that's where he connected for sure.
Yeah.
And so, at the church that I called my home church when I was a kid, my dad grew up there. My dad became a pastor there. My dad went to Assemblies of God seminary, and then was an Assemblies of God pastor or denominational leader up until just a couple of years ago, and now he's a professor at multiple universities, and I don't know if all of them are Assemblies of God, but a lot of them are. So they're still very connected in that world.
Yep. So the migration of the church, and I'd almost say for me personally, like my personal migration and the migration of the church were pretty linked. Like we didn't, like our church didn't leave the AG because I left the AG, and I didn't necessarily leave the AG because our church left the AG. But those journeys over the last, over those years from 2010 through like the 2010s, if you will, were pretty adjacent. And so what occurred was, like, I got here, the church had been pretty dysfunctional for like generations, and that was kind of a well-known thing in AG circles. Had been kind of a flagship church for some years in terms of size and everything, but like had gone through some church splits and just a lot of dysfunction over the years. And so when I came, I was 29 and first lead pastor role, and the church just said, like, I actually asked the search committee I was like, why would you want me to be the pastor? Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm 29. I don't have any experience being a lead guy. I've been married 6 years at the time, which still thinking of that now that my wife and I got here in our 6th year of marriage with a 3-year-old and an 18-month-old. And then we would have 2 more kids within the first 3 or 4 years. Like, that blows my mind that we survived. But like, just because of pastoral ministry and just the nature of the things. I told them, like, I'm going to preach the word expositionally. This is what I'm going to do. And like, whatever else. So they're like, great, that's what we need. And that's what we want to do. So yeah, came in and just started preaching book by book through the Bible. And all I can say is that, like, people that were hardcore AG types or hardcore Pentecostal types, or there were a bunch of like word of faith people that were like really into sort of the word of faith, which is sort of I wouldn't even call that prototypically AG. There's definitely a section of the AG that leans like word of faith in terms of theology, but that's not like part and parcel with AG. A lot of people within the AG reject the word of faith world, but it just kind of is what it is. So there were all those different sort of factions within the church, and people kind of that super identified with that just began to migrate out of the church. And then a lot of other people were coming at the same time. So over my first probably 6 to 8 years, 80 to 90% of the people we inherited left, right? And then, but the church grew every year exponentially. Most years by 15 to 20%, some years by 30+%, right? So as you imagine, over that period of time, you go from a church of like 500 people, most of whom kind of identify with that, to a church of 700, 800, 900, 1,000, 1,100 who like 95% of them don't identify with that. Why is that? Like, we weren't flying a denomination. I was preaching through the word. We were like, we were doing in our liturgy. It's like, I don't know. Did the liturgy fundamentally change? We from like what other AG churches were doing. I don't know the liturgies of other AG churches. I just think there wasn't anything like, other than like people randomly yelling out, which that only happened a couple times in my first couple of years here, like in the middle of the gathering, somebody yelling out in tongues or somebody yelling out like a prophecy, which not even all AG churches really do that. That's just like a thing within it a little bit. And so we were like, hey, there's like 1,000 people in the church, or there's like 800 people in the church, and some random dude yelling out from the balcony. It's just kind of out of order. So, and I know a lot of larger AG churches that operate that way. So that wasn't necessarily a yes or a no AG thing, but like, as we did certain things like that, as we're like, hey, that's not going to happen here. 50 people would leave and be like, you don't have the Holy Spirit anymore, or whatever else. Right. So there were just things like that. And so pretty much there's this slow migration that, looking back on it, I can think about, oh yeah, that makes sense. In the midst of it, for me at least, there was never like we're leaving, like this is the plan. Eventually we just got to the point where it's like the church as it existed was no longer AG, right? And so that wasn't like a super intentional migration. I think there were some changes too within the AG network. And it kind of became clear to me that, like, for one reason or another, like, I don't think, from the standpoint of the AG, me being in it was super helpful for them. And it wasn't because and they never said this, but it wasn't because I was causing any, crazy things, or I was doing all sorts of, it wasn't like I don't think I've ever said the term Assemblies of God from the front of our church in almost 13 years. Like maybe I have, but I don't think I ever have. Like, it wasn't a thing where I was doing one thing or the other. And a lot of good friends still to this day, in the AG, it's family. I mean, I was in it for 20 years. Well, actually I was in it for more than that. I was ordained in it for almost 20 years. So we, there eventually came a point in the last handful of years that, I don't know, when was it, Tyler? Probably like 6 or 7 years ago. We probably, 2017-ish, we're like, okay, we're kind of not even really in it anymore, practically speaking. And then the formal like disaffiliating and me resigning my credentials in the AG, that all occurred, a handful of years ago. But yeah.
It's interesting. I think like we man, we really did a deep dive in like why you would affiliate with a network or denomination.
Yep.
And I think that, and I might be oversimplifying things. So, I mean, this is just off the top of my head right now. So don't hold me to this, I guess. But like denominations or networks usually rally around one of four things like that I can come up with right now. It would be either specific theology, like a belief, a tradition, an experience, or like a mission, right? And so that's, and again, I'm probably missing something, but that's just what
right off the top of your head, huh?
Well, I've been thinking about what you've been talking for the last 5 minutes. And so, but yeah, so like, I mean, think about like a Lutheran church, like they are rally around like it was experience at one point, and then it becomes like the tradition of that stream, right?
Yeah.
Acts 29, who is a network that we do affiliate with, it's all about mission, right? And there's theological elements to it. But in my, I'm almost taking this from a personal standpoint rather than a church standpoint. But like coming to the divide, the Assemblies of God, in my view, very much rallies around an experience, right? It is the distinctive of speaking in tongues and the belief that every Christian should do that. So it's a theological thing, but based on an experience. And as someone who grew up in that world that questions whether or not the experience I had in that was genuine, and then also very firmly believes that not every Christian is meant to experience that.
Sure.
That's where the divide came for me personally.
Yeah.
And that was early. Like, I mean, that was when I was working at an Assemblies of God church before this one that I came to that. Yeah. And so, I mean, like I've like been swimming in the pool that I didn't belong to for a while.
Peeing in the pool, Tyler?
But swimming, I said. And so I think that's where the divide came for me.
Yeah.
And then like, when it came to us as a church, I think the divide finally came when it was like, hey, there's good reasons to affiliate with a network or denomination, and none of those reasons are true at NGC.
Anymore.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. As far as like, is there enough theological and experiential unity to be able to resource each other well?
Yeah.
Because like if a church is in a completely different stream than you, you can't resource each other well. There's just not enough overlap. Like I said, I'm going on sabbatical, and I'm trying to find a church to visit during that time that's theologically the same as us, but ecclesiologically very different, so that I don't go into work mode every Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Or I'm like, oh, we should try that at NGC, so I'm like looking at different options, but, and so like that's just a practical, like, how can you resource each other well? Also, now, like, you can definitely have brotherhood and strong relationships with people who differ from you in those experiential, theological, missional ways. Like you can have it, but it's so much more rich whenever there's unity there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that'd be another reason to align. And then for the sake of the mission, if one church believes the mission is that every Christian perform this thing, and another church believes that the mission is that every Christian do this other thing, like there's not missional alignment. And so the divide kind of just became super clear. And then from a marketing standpoint, which is a funny way to look at it, but that's how I do from my position. We weren't waving any flags for the AG or anything like that, but being a part of the AG was not attracting people who appreciated the ministry of NGC. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Like if people who came here expecting like, oh, this is an AG church, we're like,
rarely came back.
Is this an AG church?
Yeah. And the people who showed up and liked it sometimes would find out it's an AG church and be like, wait a second.
Wait, this is an AG church?
Yeah. And so
dude, we heard that for years. We started hearing that my second year here, my first or second year here. And it was so it's like, I don't know, dude, as you zoom out, and I think I'm at a funny point now because in my own development of like, going through the doctoral program the last several years and stuff like that, just finishing that up now and kind of like looking toward the future. I think there's a lot of stuff that occurred over the last, 7+ years that like I'm revisiting now in the sense of just kind of grieving some stuff and thinking through some stuff and sort of like having a little bit more time to be able to do that. And that's one of those things. I was even talking with a guy yesterday that like had a similar experience in a totally different denomination when he was younger, that like, was similar, where he did kind of left and it had been sort of a thing he'd been in generationally through his family and everything else like that. And just like, it's a different world, man. It's kind of, so yeah, there's like, I don't know, the question asker asked about like the disagreements, open-handed issues, like when those points came, it's like, looking back on it, I almost just, as I already said, like there was not really an intentional plan in those directions. And even when we left officially, it was like, we left in good standing. Like the AG was like, I resigned my credentials in good standing. They said, you guys left in good standing if you ever wanted to come back, or if you ever wanted to re-get credentials or whatever. Like there's, in the sense of like, there was still fellowship there with these guys. And that's healthy. But I think like for us, shifting our ecclesiological structure to elders, having elders, that's just not a thing at AG churches in the sense of the way we believe elders are defined in Scripture. And that, that happened my second year here. And so that began to set probably a different trajectory. And we're just literally going out of 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, 1 Peter 5, Acts 20, and like looking at what biblical elders are and trying to build that in the local church. Probably the major divide, if you look at from the AG standpoint, would be our stance on sexual ethics, which is, and I put this in it. Some people might not see this as sexual ethics, but I think it's firmly in that category. We're complementarian rather than egalitarian, and the AG is a very strong egalitarian network or denomination, and there are thousands of complementarians in the AG that are ordained in the AG, thousands across the country, but and churches that practice that. But it's a pretty big divide in the denomination, sometimes even generationally. And so, but that was a thing that was an issue for them, I think, with us a bit. And then our soteriology is reformed, and the AG is more Arminian, obviously, and so. But it's interesting, like and then obviously those Pentecostal distinctives, like you talked about with the tongues thing and those kind of deals. Again, it's funny though, because being in the AG for as long as we were, you get behind closed doors, even with network leaders at times. And it's like, they know there's generational divides. There's like divides geographically, like even the way you define that, Tyler, like of like that experience of speaking in tongues being like the central thing. Like that's certainly true in the South and the Midwest. Kind of in the Northwest on the West Coast, like that's an experiential part of it, but that's not always the main thing, in these areas of the country. So, it is what it is. But I think there's like, the AG is a little over 100 years old now, and it continues to sort of grow and change in certain ways, and probably the next generation will be a little more that way. But I just think, I don't know, at the end of the day, for me, there's always that aspect of like, from the time I got here to our church, or even at my old church up north where I was a youth pastor, like I'm accountable to the Lord every time I step into the pulpit to like preach the word at what I see in the word and do that in honesty and integrity and all that kind of stuff. And I think the AG or any other denomination or network would say this and want this out of their ministers, that like you're not there to build a denomination or to posture your church as like something that's going to serve a denomination. Like you're there to serve the local church, for the local church to serve the local community, to be the church, to, pray for salvations, to like baptize people, to take the Lord's Supper, to preach the word, to be on the mission. You're there to do that. And I think the AG would agree with that. Most of the guys I know within the AG. And so at the end of the day, it's like, I think judging for us, so for our elders, there was like points over these last several years where it's like, we would zoom out a little bit and be like, what is our church here? Like what serves us best in terms of what serves the mission best? I guess that's what serves the mission best. What is going to be there that will help resource our pastors and our elders? What's going to be a place where we can, do these things, and then is there anything with stuff we're affiliated with that are hindrances to that, or are we a hindrance to the things we're affiliated with? And you got to judge through all that and pray through all that. And it was a years and years and years long process. So there's no like quick things or any of that kind of stuff. It was all done over a long period of time through prayer and everything else. So yeah. And as I said, we still have great fellowship a lot. I got buddies at AG churches that ask me to preach. There's still a lot of relationship there. Obviously something we've been in our whole lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Two thoughts, and I don't even know how they're connected, but I feel like they are. Is my wife and I were having a conversation the other day because our 6-year-old really wants to get into hunting. And like, if you know me,
yeah, you're a big gun guy.
It's like, like he's like digging into the opposite thing that I was a part of, or that I would be a part of, And so like he has like a Lamborghini poster on his wall and he wants to like go hunting. And I'm just like, for real?
In a Lamborghini?
I doubt that they're connected, but, and so we made the joke, Katie and I did that, like, maybe we should like feign that we're really into stuff that we want our kids to be opposite of, so that they end up liking the things we like as adults, because there is that, like, you're going to shift away from the preferences of your parents and stuff like that. And one thing that's become clear as I've gotten older in this denominational thing, is that every network denomination you could come into or grow up in has issues that might make you want to leave at some point.
Oh, 100%.
Right. And so like, even not denominations networks that I've thought like, oh, theologically, I'm like, oh, I would love to be a part of that. And then I see them in a headline and I'm like, glad I'm not a part of that,
constant.
And so like, this is not like a conversation about like, oh, this one denomination or network has issues. All of them do if they're run by humans, And so that's like a very important thing to remember, especially if you're younger and you're feeling that angst right now. Yeah. Cause like when I was younger and feeling that angst, I didn't think that way. I thought like, if I just got out of this, it's going to be all better.
Yeah, sure.
And then the other thing, this question talks about these open-handed issues. We've talked about it a bunch of times before, but Gavin Ortland's book, Finding the Right Hills to Die On, he and then Gary Breshears does this too. Things do we die for? Things we divide over, things we debate about, things we decide over. And that, like, those top two categories are really those times where, we've talked a lot on here about like, when is it time to leave a church? And the best answer we've given has our name in it. It's like when you can't be the church at that church. Yeah. And those die for and divide for issues are those ones that are super clear. But every once in a while you'll get like one of those, like, we're going to debate about this. And it's just like, I can't in good conscience keep going with this faith family. Yeah. And so that's when you hit that point of like those open-handed issues causing people to divide and close into tribes. But
yeah, dude, the kingdom's really big. Like, and the Lord is sovereign in it, and had this church not been AG for, almost 70 years, you and I wouldn't be here. Yeah. Like, sure. I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here, Tyler. Like had your family, not been in the AG all those years, like that, there were 100 people that applied for your job, Tyler, when we were interviewing people back in 2012, I think it was. And like, it's not like I was like, ooh, but it was like your parents were in it and you weren't ordained in it. And it was like both those things stood out to me. And then, so you kind of knew that world, but you also were like journeying within it and trying to find, as we've talked about on this podcast before, our personal journeys, like you're trying to find that theological home, as it were, and still just kind of homeless. And I just think, like, I don't know, the networks, denominations, all these types of things, like the local church, man, is what's in Scripture. Like the local church body, there's ways that it should function. There's prescriptions in the text about the local church. I think we got to do everything we can to get that right as Christians in the churches that we are a part of. And then in the ways that those churches can partner together in their local community across denominational lines, or in larger communities, larger regions along denominational lines, whatever, like those are the things to judge, I think. And like, it's all God's, well, how should I say this? Like the Big C Church is so much bigger than any local church or any denomination. And in service of the kingdom, like we've got to be honest, we've got to be clear, we've got to do the things that the Scriptures call us to do in terms of preaching the gospel, preaching the word, rooting in a local church and caring for that community and engaging the mission around the world. And all those are things. So in whatever ways any sort of a network or denomination or parachurch or whatever serves those needs for your local church, be engaged, be involved, do those things, and then be clear and be unified on it. And, Yeah, I even, this is a question that sat there for 3 or 4 months. It's funny because it's like, I don't think we were avoiding it like you said, but yeah, it's even something that as you talk about these things on the internet, like it's like people can take stuff out of context and whatever else. And I don't know. I think we've been honest on it and the entire time and clear on it the entire time. And I think the Lord has guided us along the way. So that's especially clear as you look back, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. If you would like to send in a question, you can do that on social media at To Be the Church, in the YouTube comments right below this video at youtube.com/To Be the Church, or via email podcast@tobethechurch.com. Have a great week.